This is the Asus Zenbook UX305CA. It's the updated version of what was almost my favourite laptop of last year, the original UX305. Like that laptop, this one aims to bring the premium look and feel of high-end £1,000 Ultrabooks to a more affordable level, which in this instance is around £650. For that you get a sleek metal chassis, long battery life, an Intel Core M processor and a Quad HD IPS screen. It's a pretty good combination for the money. Unfortunately, where the UX305 of last year was an absolutely perfect example of how to make a lower cost Ultrabook, the UX305CA has veered off in the wrong direction. What is still without fault is the thin and light aluminium exterior. Yes, it's very much like a MacBook Air, but I don't really have a problem with this, as I'd much rather see manufacturers create good Windows versions of Apple laptops than have them try to be different just for the sake of it. Unlike the MacBook Air though, the UX305CA isn't hewn from solid chunks of aluminium, but uses pressed sheets formed over a plastic chassis. This means it isn't quite as rigid, so if you pick it up by the corner, it flexes a little. You'll hardly notice it in normal use, but side by side you realise the solidity of the MacBook. Thankfully, the UX305CA doesn't wobble around or flex when you're typing. Another thing I really like about the design of this laptop is the way the whole of the bottom is one unbroken sheet of metal. It just looks so much tidier than machines that have holes for air intakes or exhausts. Instead, all the cooling is done through a grille that sits in front of the lid hinge, again just like on the MacBook Air. Taking a closer look at that new Quad HD screen, first impressions are pretty good. It can go nice and bright, viewing angles are good, and there's plenty of saturation to colours. Plus, of course, you're getting a whopping 3200 by 1800 pixels, which potentially opens up a wealth of opportunities for using this as a serious work machine. Unfortunately, there are three problems. One is that Windows still isn't that great at handling really high resolutions. Obviously at native resolution everything looks really small, and if you use the Windows scaling tools there are still quite a few instances where apps or little bits of apps don't look right. The second problem is that under test conditions the screen actually performs really badly. My colorimeter measured a contrast of just 476:1, that's less than half of what a typical reasonable quality IPS screen would get, and is normally the sort of level where there's an obvious greyness to blacks or dullness to whites. In most other ways the screen is decent though, with 84% sRGB coverage, a high 403 nits maximum brightness and reasonably accurate colour temperature. So the upshot is my advice would be this laptop is fine for more casual use, but anyone that needs a higher class of display would be best looking elsewhere, or picking up last year's model that had a great quality 1080p display. However, the third and by far the most important problem is that the high resolution has a big impact on battery life. Where the original UX305 lasted a class-leading 11 hours and 50 minutes, the UX305CA only manages 7.5. Now that's still about manageable if you're looking for a laptop that will last a working day, but when there are so many Ultrabooks that can do better, it seriously dents this laptop's appeal. All the more so because the whole point of this laptop is that its main compromise is using an Intel Core M processor, which uses far less power but is noticeably slower than a typical Core i5 or i7 processor that you'd find in a normal Ultrabook. So if this laptop can't even offer the awesome battery life you'd expect from using a Core M, it's starting to not make much sense. At least the Core M in this machine is of the latest Intel Skylake variety, which is quite a bit faster than the one in the original UX305. This means this laptop is absolutely fine for day-to-day browsing, video watching, checking emails, all that sort of stuff. It's just that when demand starts rising, it'll start to choke considerably sooner than a Core i processor. Elsewhere, this laptop mostly gets it right. You've got an adequate 128GB SSD and 4GB of RAM. The keyboard doesn't have backlighting, but it's otherwise excellent with a great layout and nice key action. The speakers are also surprisingly powerful. There's no bass of course, but audio is clear and stays distortion free at high volumes. The trackpad is also okay, with a nice one-click surface and reasonably accurate tracking. However, the click action is a bit stiff and indistinct, and I found the metal surface didn't allow my fingers to glide across it very easily. All told then, the UX305CA is a bit of a letdown. That said, it still offers good value, and for those that would like a high resolution screen and don't mind the compromise in battery life, it's not a bad buy. However, I think for most people sticking with the better quality 1080p screen from last year's model would have been a far better move by Asus. Plus it really is disappointing that the company hasn't fixed the slightly iffy trackpad.